The island was even more beautiful in person than it looked on the website. As we crossed the threshold of this little bed and breakfast, I could hardly withstand my excitement. My boyfriend Henry gave me a little nudge and smile as we waited on our room key. The look in his blue eyes told me that as soon as we got upstairs, he'd be launching into reminding me how much I didn't want to go on this trip. Henry had just completed his master's program in history, and to celebrate, he convinced me to join him on a nice island trip. It was the middle of winter, but I will admit that the climate was a much nicer first impression than the harsh winter back home. I looked around the room, taking in the many historical artifacts and pictures that hung from the walls. Right next to the staircase, there was a large painting labeled The Lost Colony. Henry had spent much of the drive here telling me the island's history. Long ago, it was to be the home of the first English settlers. However, the first set of colonists abandoned the island, leaving behind nothing but skeletal remains. A few years later, a new boatload of people came to put up a settlement. Their leader went on a supply run and returned years later to find everything gone without trace, except for the word Croatoan carved into a fence post. When we finally got to our room, Henry began teasing me, as predicted. I plopped down on the bed, thumbing through a brochure that was left on the side table. Henry had made a careful schedule of all the sites we needed to see and when to see them, long before we'd ever left home. He was working on a book about the island and wanted to see every museum and notable rock that was open to the public the week of Christmas. I, on the other hand, was much more intrigued by the nature reserve and the hiking trails that the brochure mentioned. Our trip began with several days of icy rain. Henry was happy to take his time in the nearest museum, listening to tour guides repeating stories we'd heard in grade school history classes and occasionally throwing me the random fun fact. We'd spend the evening in the hotel room, him typing away on his laptop while I wondered why we hadn't gone to Florida like our old roommates. It wasn't until the third day when we awoke late in the morning to see that there wasn't a cloud in the sky that I finally talked Henry into checking out the trails. He was absolutely against it at first, protesting that it was too cold or he needed more sleep. After a lengthy battle, I ultimately convinced him to throw on a coat and catch a taxi across the island with me. From the tree line, I could already tell just how massive the forest was for this area. I slid on my backpack and turned to my boyfriend. "Isn't it great?" He didn't reply, so I stepped onto the path without looking back at him. Our route was guided by faded directional signs, and I tried my hardest to take the shortest route. It may not have been as cold as it was back home, but the occasional wind made me shiver, and I doubted Henry's complaints would get any quieter. Still, every so often he would make me stop so he could take a picture or ramble off something about the people who lived here hundreds of years ago. "And you," I teased, once we stopped for what felt like the upteenth time, "didn't want to come hiking in the first place." Henry was crouching near the edge of the path, his camera held up to his eye as he focused on something deeper in the trees. He shook his head. "Hey, if you're going to insist on hiking an abandoned nature trail in the middle of December, I'm at least going to get something out of it." He clicked the camera button and pulled his head back, his brow furrowed as he stared at the camera screen. "I think there's something out there," he said. "It's probably a deer." I took a few steps back so I could see through some trees overhead and bit my lip. "We should probably head back. It'll be dark soon." "It's not a deer." Henry was on his feet now, his camera held out in disbelief. "I think it's Bigfoot. Look." "Oh my God, Henry," I groaned. I stepped over to him to take a look at the grainy photo on the camera screen. A gray motion blur was barely visible between the trees, tall and ragged, humanoid, like a Halloween prop in the old church haunted houses we would go to as kids. I took a sharp breath in. "It looks like a person." "I don't see anyone now," Henry replied. I shook my head and repeated, "We should head back. They could be hurt." I felt like my heart had stopped. I was never one for facing moral dilemmas, especially any that involved fear. On one hand, this could be a crazy person streaking through woods in the middle of December. On the other hand, well, I didn't know what it could be, but I doubted Henry's Bigfoot theory. Still, we stood there a moment longer, staring at each other. I was becoming increasingly aware of the nearly gone shadows as the sun set overhead. We never should have headed out so late. Henry finally spoke. "I'll go take a look." I shook my head, but he was already stepping into the underbrush, step after step, until he was several yards away, and he stopped, his mouth open. The next thing I knew, we were running away from something I hadn't even seen, running off the path and deep into the trees. He mumbled something about teeth, about a skeleton, about going as fast as we could. His hands didn't let go of mine for a second. Not until my foot caught on a tree root, at least. Not until Henry was jerking me along behind him, with his arm wrapped around my waist. I had to fight not to call out as the pain shot up my leg. Another step, we both knew I wasn't going to make it out of these woods. Another step, it was getting darker, colder. Another step, I could barely see Henry's face, but I could feel how scared he was, the way he shivered. Another step, crunch. A loud, piercing shriek filled our ears. A loud, piercing shriek filled our ears. Then the sound of some great beast running toward us. Henry tried to propel us as fast as he could, but in the dark it was impossible to tell where to run. He promised me he was going to get me out of this, that I would be okay. The beast was getting closer, the pounding of its steps getting louder. Its stench hit us, and then we tumbled. There was a small cliff, and we went over it. I lost my grip on Henry as we fell, and in the dark I didn't dare try to find it again. I hit the ground and felt the wind get knocked out of me, my stomach hurting as I tried to breathe. I waited. I wondered if Henry was there, too, waiting. I lifted my head in a small movement, gently twisting on my side to see what stood just feet away from us. Skin pulled taut and gray, eyes sunken in his skull and its ribs clearly visible. From the ground it appeared 12 feet tall, though I tried rationalizing that it was a matter of perspective. The scent of rotting flesh took over my sense of smell, and I felt myself tremble as I stared down the creature. The odd part was, it didn't seem to see me. It sniffed at the air, almost like a great wolf, taking a hunched step forward, placing a hand just inches from my head. I can't say if it lasted seconds or minutes, but I didn't move. I couldn't. I closed my eyes. As the creature moved away from me, I couldn't look to see if Henry was still there. I kept my eyes closed as tightly as I could, but I could hear it. My God, I could hear it, the low yell that escaped his lips, and the sickeningly wet sound of his blood, the snapping of bone like a wishbone on Thanksgiving. I wanted to scream, to cry, but it just wouldn't come out. It felt like ages, but it was over quick. Still, I didn't open my eyes until the sun had set, until I would barely be able to see, and all I'd see was his blue eyes, seemingly the only thing remaining of someone I once found so perfect. On Roanoke Island there is snowfall about once a year. Tonight, small flakes began to fall and drift over us like the scent of his blood, creating butterflies in my chest. In the dark, I heard my stomach let out a long, low growl. The newspaper headline read clearly, "Missing hiker found dead. On January 1st, 2017, missing hiker Henry St. Peters, 25, was found mutilated in what appeared to be an attack by a vicious predator. The wallet of his girlfriend, Ava Blake, aged 23, was found nearby, but there are no other indicators of her whereabouts. The search continues, but authorities are urging citizens to stay inside." In a press release, Officer Evans said, "There is something dangerous on Roanoke Island."